when Native Americans beat Harvard at their own game. November 9th, 1912, 3:47 p.m. Soldiers Field, Cambridge, Massachusetts. The crisp autumn air couldn't hide the tension as Jim Thorpe, a Sac and Fox Indian, standing 5'11" and weighing 185 pounds of pure athleticism, studied the Harvard defense through eyes that had seen more hardship than most men twice his age. Around him, his Carlisle Indian Industrial School teammates, sons of Apache warriors, Cheyenne chiefs, and Sioux leaders crouched in formation, their leather helmets offering little protection against what was about to come. Across the line, Harvard's players, sons of Boston Brahmins, Wall Street bankers, and industrial magnates, sneered at the upstarts from Pennsylvania. These weren't real college men. These were Indians from a trade school, here to learn their place in civilized society. Captain Percy Wendell, Harvard's All-American, had told reporters before the game, "We'll teach these savages how football is played by gentlemen." What Wendell didn't know, what none of the 40,000 spectators packed into Harvard Stadium could have imagined, was that they were about to witness the systematic dismantling of everything Eastern football represented. Within 2 hours, Jim Thorpe would score 5 touchdowns, rush for 173 yards, throw for 2 more scores, kick 4 extra points, and punt for a 48-yard average. But the score would only tell part of the story. This is the tale of how the children of conquered nations used their oppressor's game to strike back against an empire. How innovation born from necessity defeated tradition backed by privilege. How the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, an institution designed to kill the Indian and save the man, became the birthplace of modern football. And how the greatest natural athlete America had ever seen became both a national hero and a cautionary tale about what happens when you dare to win too much in a country that never wanted you to win at all. The prison disguised as a school. Carlisle Indian Industrial School wasn't founded to create champions. It was founded to destroy cultures. Captain Richard Henry Pratt, a cavalry officer who had spent years fighting Native Americans on the frontier, established the school in 1,879 inches, the abandoned Carlisle Barracks in Pennsylvania. His philosophy was brutally simple: kill the Indian in him and save the man. When Native American children arrived at Carlisle, some voluntarily, many forcibly removed from their families, they underwent immediate transformation. Their long hair was cut short. Their traditional clothes were burned. Their native names were replaced with English ones. Speaking their tribal languages earned punishment. Practicing their religions meant confinement. The school sat on 27 acres of former military grounds, its stone buildings still bearing the marks of its martial past. Students lived in barracks. They marched in formation. They learned trades: blacksmithing, carpentry, printing, farming. The goal was to transform them into manual laborers who would assimilate into white society at the lowest rungs. But Pratt understood something his contemporaries didn't. To truly break native cultures, you had to prove they were inferior. And what better way to demonstrate inferiority than through athletic competition? In 1893, Carlisle fielded its first football team. The sport was still evolving, from rugby, a brutal affair of mass formations, flying wedges, and gang tackling that regularly left players crippled or dead. It was the perfect metaphor for American expansion: violent, territorial, winner-take-all. The early Carlisle teams were mediocre, losing to local colleges and military academies. But they learned. They adapted. And by 1899, under coach Glenn "Pop" Warner, a young Cornell graduate who would become one of football's greatest innovators, they started winning. In 1903, Warner recruited a 6-year-old Sac and Fox boy named Wa-To-Hook. His English name was James Francis Thorpe. His friends called him Jim. Thorpe had been born in a one-room cabin in Oklahoma Territory in 1887. His twin brother Charlie died of pneumonia at age 9, a loss that haunted Jim for life. His mother Hiram died when he was 12. His father Hiram, an Irish-American who had married into the Sac and Fox Nation, was an alcoholic who struggled to care for his remaining children. Jim ran away from Indian boarding schools repeatedly, once traveling 270 miles on foot to return home. He was caught, Sent back, ran away again. When he was sent to Carlisle in 1904, he arrived angry, grieving, and convinced he'd never fit into white society. What he didn't know was that his body contained gifts that would change American sports forever. The anatomy of greatness. Jim Thorpe's physical capabilities defied explanation even by modern sports science standards. He stood 5'11", not particularly tall, but carried 185 pounds of muscle, distributed with perfect athletic proportion. His shoulders were broad, his waist narrow, his legs powerful, but the real magic was in the way his body moved. Warner, who coached Thorpe for nearly a decade, later wrote, "He had the most perfectly coordinated body I ever saw. His reflexes were instantaneous. His timing was perfect. He could do anything with a football that the human body was capable of doing." The numbers support Warner's assessment. Thorpe could run the 100-yard dash in 10 seconds flat, long jump 23 feet 6 inches, high jump 6 feet 5 inches, throw the javelin 163 feet, put the shot 47 feet, punt a football 80 yards, drop kick field goals from 50 yards, bench press 250 pounds. More importantly, he could do all of these things in the same afternoon, then play a full football game the next day. But Thorpe's greatest asset wasn't his physical gifts. It was his football intelligence. He understood leverage, momentum, and spatial relationships intuitively. He could read defenses, anticipate plays, and react faster than opponents could process what was happening. Albert Exendine, a Cherokee teammate who became an All-American end, recalled, "Jim could see the whole field at once. While you were thinking about your assignment, he'd already identified the weakness in the defense and adjusted his route. Playing with him was like having a coach on the field who could also outrun everyone." Warner, recognizing he had perhaps the greatest natural athlete in history, built his entire offensive system around Thorpe's abilities. But he also understood something crucial. Carlisle would never win by playing Harvard's game, Harvard's way. They would have to innovate. The innovation born from desperation. Pop Warner faced a mathematical problem that bordered on impossible. His Carlisle teams typically had 20 to 25 players total. Harvard, Yale, and Princeton, the Eastern powers that dominated football, had squads of 60 to 80 players, many of them weighing 200 to 220 pounds. In an era where substitutions were severely limited and most players went both ways, depth mattered enormously. Moreover, Carlisle's players were smaller. The average Carlisle lineman weighed 165 pounds. Harvard's line averaged 190 pounds. In the mass momentum football of the early 1900s, where plays consisted of 11 men forming a human battering ram to push through the defense, weight differential was often decisive. Warner couldn't win a war of attrition, so he changed the war. Between 1903 and 1912, Carlisle became football's great laboratory. Warner and his players, many of whom had grown up learning tactical thinking through traditional hunting and warfare games, developed innovations that would transform football from rugby with an oval ball into something uniquely American. The hidden ball trick. In 1903, playing against Harvard, Carlisle ran a play where multiple players tucked the ball under their jerseys while running in different directions. Harvard players, unable to identify the ball carrier, chased the wrong men while the actual runner waltzed into the end zone. Harvard's coach, Percy Houghton, was so enraged he lobbied successfully to have the play banned. The forward pass. While not invented at Carlisle, Warner perfected it. The forward pass became legal in 1906, following rule changes designed to reduce football's brutality. Most coaches viewed it as a desperation play, unreliable and risky. Warner saw it as the great equalizer. His smaller, faster receivers could beat larger defenders downfield. He developed route concepts, the button hook, the post pattern, the screen that are still used today. The single wing formation, Warner's signature offensive system, spread players across the field rather than bunching them in traditional mass formations. It used deception, misdirection, and timing rather than power. The quarterback became a blocking back. The tailback, Thorpe's position, became the focal point, taking direct snaps 7 yards behind the line. The spiral punt. Before Thorpe, punts tumbled end over end, making them shorter and easier to field. Thorpe taught himself to kick spirals that traveled farther, bounced unpredictably, and were harder to return. His 80-yard spiraling punts became legendary. The screen pass. Warner invented this play specifically to counter the aggressive rush defenses teams used against Carlisle. As defenders crashed in, Carlisle's backs would slip behind the line and catch short passes with blockers in front, turning a potential disaster into a big gain. But Warner's greatest innovation was psychological. He understood that Carlisle's opponents expected Indians to play wild, undisciplined football. So he made his teams clinical, precise, and fundamentally sound. Then, at crucial moments, they'd unleash chaos. Gus Welch, a Chippewa quarterback and one of Thorpe's closest friends, described the strategy. "We'd play straight football for 3 quarters. Let them think they had us figured out. Then, in the 4th quarter, Pop would unleash the trick plays. By the time they adjusted, the game was over." The 1911 season. The year everything changed. The 1911 season was when America discovered Jim Thorpe. Carlisle opened against Lebanon Valley, winning 53-0. Thorpe scored 4 touchdowns. Then Muhlenberg, 32-0. 3 Thorpe touchdowns. Dickinson, 17-0. Pittsburgh, 17-0. Lafayette, 19-0. But the real statement came on October 28th against Penn State, one of the strongest teams in the East. Penn State arrived in Carlisle confident. They had a massive line, an experienced backfield, and had never lost to the Indians. Their strategy was simple: contain Thorpe, force other Carlisle players to beat them. For 3 quarters, it worked. The game was scoreless. Penn State's defense, keying on Thorpe, held him to minimal gains. The Carlisle players were exhausted most, playing both offense and defense for all 60 minutes. Penn State, with fresh substitutes rotating in, looked poised to wear them down. Then, with 10 minutes remaining in the 4th quarter, Thorpe took a direct snap at midfield. He started right, then cut back left. Penn State's defense, anticipating the direction of his earlier runs, flowed the wrong way. What happened next became the stuff of legend. Thorpe broke into the open field at Penn State's 45-yard line. The safety, their last defender, took a perfect angle and dove for the tackle at the 30. Thorpe didn't dodge. He didn't spin. He lowered his shoulder and ran straight through him. The defender bounced off like he'd hit a tree. Thorpe didn't even break stride. Touchdown. Carlisle 17, Penn State 0. Warner later said, "In that moment, Jim Thorpe announced himself to the football world. That wasn't just a great run. That was a statement. We're here. We're real. And we're not going anywhere." Carlisle finished the 1911 season 11-1. Their only loss coming to Syracuse 12-11 inches a game, where Thorpe had the flu and could barely stand. They outscored opponents 298-49. Thorpe scored 198 of those points. Walter Camp, the father of American football, who selected the annual All-American team, named Thorpe first-team All-American halfback. It was the first time a player from a Native American school received such recognition. But the establishment wasn't quite ready to accept Carlisle as equals. Not yet. That would require defeating Harvard at Harvard. The game, November 9th, 1912. The train ride from Carlisle to Cambridge took 8 hours. The Carlisle players, all 18 of them who had made the traveling squad, sat quietly as the Pennsylvania countryside gave way to New England towns. They knew what awaited them. Harvard Stadium, the first massive reinforced concrete stadium in America, seated 40,000 people. It would be full of Boston society, politicians, industrialists, judges, professors, people who had never met a Native American but had firm opinions about their inferiority. The newspapers had been brutal in the weeks leading up to the game. The Boston Herald ran a cartoon showing Harvard players as Roman centurions facing savages with tomahawks. The Harvard Crimson published an opinion piece arguing that Carlisle shouldn't be allowed to compete against real colleges because trade schools for unfortunates were not academic peers. Percy Wendell, Harvard's All-American captain and a blue-blood Bostonian, gave an interview that was reprinted nationally. "We respect Carlisle's effort to improve themselves through education. But football requires not just physical ability, but intellectual sophistication. The Indians play a wild, unpredictable style that lacks the discipline and strategy of proper football. We expect to win comfortably." Pop Warner read the quotes to his team the night before the game. He didn't need to add commentary. The bulletin board material spoke for itself. Jim Thorpe, now 25 years old and in his final season at Carlisle, sat in the front row. He'd been through this before: the condescension, the assumptions, the casual racism dressed up as compliment. But this time felt different. This wasn't just another game. This was Harvard, the oldest, richest, most prestigious university in America, the institution that educated presidents and Supreme Court justices, the school that represented everything his people had been fighting for 400 years. "Let's make them remember us," Thorpe said quietly. The locker room erupted in agreement. November 9th dawned cold and gray. By game time, the temperature had dropped to 38 degrees. The field was hard, the wind steady from the north. Harvard's players emerged from the tunnel to thunderous applause. They wore crimson jerseys, leather helmets, and the confidence of young men who'd never questioned their place in the world. Carlisle emerged moments later to scattered, polite applause, mixed with curious murmurs. Their jerseys read "Carlisle" across the chest. Some players wore their hair longer than typical, a small act of resistance against the school's assimilation policies. They were noticeably smaller than Harvard's players, but moved with a fluid grace that caught attention. The opening kickoff went to Harvard. They ran 3 plays up the middle for 6 yards total, then punted. Conservative, powerful, predictable. Carlisle's first possession started at their own 25-yard line. Warner had scripted the opening drive meticulously. He wanted to establish something immediately. First play, direct snap to Thorpe at tailback. He swept right, cutting behind his blockers. Harvard's defense, coached to key on Thorpe, flowed toward him. Thorpe covered 18 yards before being dragged down by 4 tacklers. Second play, Thorpe dropped back to pass. Harvard's defense, not expecting a throw, was caught off guard. Thorpe launched a spiral downfield to Alex Arcasa, a Colville end, for 22 yards. The crowd grew quiet. This wasn't the undisciplined chaos they'd expected. Third play, another pass, this time to Gus Welch, the Chippewa quarterback playing at halfback. 15 yards. Harvard's players looked confused. In the huddle, Percy Wendell shouted, "Stop the passes! Press the receivers!" Fourth play, with Harvard's defense backing up to defend the pass, Thorpe took the direct snap and ran straight ahead. A perfect seam opened in Harvard's defensive line. They'd over-pursued trying to cover receivers. Thorpe accelerated through the gap, broke 1 tackle at the 20-yard line, stiff-armed a safety at the 10, and dove into the end zone. Touchdown Carlisle. 6-0. 60 seconds into the game. The Harvard crowd sat stunned. This wasn't how the script was supposed to go. Warner's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. He knew Harvard's coaches had studied film. Yes, film existed in 1912, though grainy and limited, of Carlisle's running game. They'd prepared to stop Thorpe as a runner, so Warner opened with passes, stretching Harvard's defense horizontally and vertically. Once they adjusted, he'd run. When they committed to stopping the run, he'd pass again. It was chess played at 20 miles per hour, with 22 pieces. Harvard's offense tried to respond. They ran their traditional power game tight formations, mass blocking, grinding runs up the middle. It gained 4 yards, 3 yards, 2 yards, methodical but slow. But every time they punted, Thorpe would field it and return it 15, 20, sometimes 30 yards. His returns weren't flashy. He simply found seams, used his blockers perfectly, and ran with a combination of power and speed that Harvard's coverage units couldn't match. Late in the first quarter, Carlisle got the ball back at midfield. 6 plays later, Thorpe scored again on a 23-yard run where he broke 4 tackles. 12-0 Carlisle. In the second quarter, Harvard finally adjusted their defense. They put 8 men in the box, dared Carlisle to throw. Warner, recognizing the adjustment, called a screen pass one of his innovations. Thorpe took the snap, faked a run, then flipped the ball to Welch, who had slipped behind the rushing Harvard defenders. With multiple blockers in front, Welch raced 43 yards for a touchdown. 18-0 Carlisle. The Harvard crowd had gone completely silent. On the field, Harvard's players were demoralized. Everything they tried failed. Every scheme was countered. Their size advantage meant nothing against Carlisle's speed and precision. Just before halftime, Thorpe took a punt at his own 15-yard line. He returned it 85 yards for a touchdown, breaking 7 tackles, reversing field twice, and finally outrunning Harvard's pursuit to the end zone. The Harvard student section, thousands strong, sat in shocked silence as Thorpe crossed the goal line. It was the most humiliating moment in Harvard football history. Halftime score, 24-0 Carlisle. In the Harvard locker room, Coach Percy Haughton tried to rally his team. "They're not better than you. They're not smarter than you. They've just been lucky. We're going to come out and play Harvard football strong, physical, disciplined. We're going to wear them down." In the Carlisle locker room, Warner told his players something different. "They're broken. You've taken everything they believed about themselves and shattered it. Now finish it." The third quarter was a clinic. Thorpe threw 2 touchdown passes, one to Arcasa, another to Joe Guion, a Chippewa running back. He ran for another score himself. He kicked all the extra points. By the start of the fourth quarter, the score was 41-0. Harvard's players had given up. You could see it in their body language, the way they jogged slowly to the line, the half-hearted tackles, the absence of communication. They'd been psychologically destroyed. With 6 minutes left in the game, Warner pulled Thorpe and most of his starters. The backups, mostly younger players seeing limited action, continued to dominate. The final score was 54-7. The only Harvard score came on a late touchdown drive against Carlisle's third-string defense. The aftermath, when winning becomes dangerous. The locker room, after the game, was subdued, not celebratory. The Carlisle players knew what they'd done, not just beaten Harvard, but humiliated them. In America in 1912, that was dangerous for Native Americans to do. Still, the immediate response was electric. Newspapers across the country ran headlines: "Carlisle Indians destroy Harvard." "Thorpe unstoppable in historic victory." "Harvard suffers worst defeat in history." The New York Times sports section devoted its entire front page to the game. The article, while praising Carlisle's performance, couldn't help but reveal the era's prejudices. The Indians played with a precision and intelligence that defied their savage heritage. One must wonder if white coaching has elevated them beyond their natural capabilities. Even in victory, Carlisle couldn't escape racism. Thorpe's performance was statistically absurd. 191 yards rushing on 15 carries. 2 touchdown passes, 39 and 34 yards. 4 rushing touchdowns. 1 punt return touchdown, 85 yards. 6 extra points kicked. 7 punts for 48-yard average. Played all 60 minutes on both offense and defense. Walter Camp named Thorpe first-team All-American for the 2nd consecutive year, writing, "There is no player in America who approaches Thorpe's combination of power, speed, and intelligence. He is not merely an All-American. He may be the greatest player who ever lived." But the establishment struck back in subtle ways. Harvard's Percy Haughton claimed Carlisle had used ineligible players. They hadn't. All were verified students. Yale's coach accused Warner of unsportsmanlike trick plays. Princeton refused to schedule Carlisle for 1913, claiming they had calendar conflicts. The message was clear. You can win, but not like that. Not so completely. Not so embarrassingly. Carlisle finished the 1912 season 1-2-1-1, their only blemish, a 27-6 loss to Penn and a tie with Washington and Jefferson. They outscored opponents 504-114. Thorpe scored 198 points personally, then a record. Then came Stockholm, the Olympics, glory and betrayal. In summer 1912, between his junior and senior seasons at Carlisle, Jim Thorpe traveled to Stockholm, Sweden for the Olympic Games. He competed in both the pentathlon and decathlon, events that tested the complete athlete across running, jumping, and throwing disciplines. Thorpe dominated both competitions with margins never seen before or since. In the pentathlon, he finished first in 4 of 5 events. In the decathlon, he set records in 8 of 10 events. King Gustav V of Sweden presented him with the gold medals, reportedly saying, "Sir, you are the greatest athlete in the world." Thorpe replied, with characteristic humility, "Thanks, King." The American press went wild. Thorpe appeared on the cover of every major magazine. Parades were planned. He was a national hero, the first Native American to achieve such status in white America. Then, in January 1913, 2 months after the Harvard game, the Worcester Telegram published a story revealing that Thorpe had played semi-professional baseball in North Carolina during summers of 1909 and 1910. He'd been paid $2 per game to play for the Rocky Mount Railroaders and the Fayetteville Highlanders. This violated Olympic rules requiring amateur status. Never mind that many Olympic athletes received under-the-table payments, or that college athletes from wealthy families didn't need to work summers, while athletes from poor backgrounds did. Never mind that Thorpe had earned perhaps $60 total, barely enough to survive. The Amateur Athletic Union demanded Thorpe return his medals. The Olympic Committee voted to strip his records. Major newspapers that had celebrated him months earlier now condemned him as a professional and a cheat. The speed and severity of the response revealed the subtext. Thorpe hadn't just won, he'd won too much. He'd made white athletes look inferior. He'd challenged assumptions about racial hierarchies. And now the establishment had found their excuse to tear him down. Thorpe released a letter, likely written by Carlisle administrators, apologizing for his naivete about the rules. "I hope I will be partly excused by the fact that I was simply an Indian schoolboy and did not know all about such things." The letter's humble, almost servile tone was completely unlike Thorpe's personality. But in 1913, a Native American who'd embarrassed Harvard couldn't afford to be defiant. His medals were stripped, his records erased, his Olympic glory transformed into scandal. Years later, Charles Chiefbender, a Chippewa who pitched in Major League Baseball and was one of Thorpe's friends, said, "Jim's real crime wasn't playing for money. It was being Indian and being better than everyone else." They couldn't let that stand. The decline, when the game discards its heroes. After the Olympic scandal, Thorpe's life became a study in what happens to those who achieve too much in a society not ready for their success. He left Carlisle and played professional baseball for 6 years with the New York Giants, Cincinnati Reds, and Boston Braves. He was mediocre, a .252 lifetime batting average. Baseball wasn't his sport, but it paid. In 1915, he married Iva Miller, a Carlisle graduate from the Cherokee Nation. They would have 4 children together, though the marriage would end in divorce in 1924. In 1920, Thorpe helped found the American Professional Football Association, later renamed the National Football League, and served as its first president. He played professional football until 1928, when he was 41 years old, jumping between teams that often couldn't afford to pay him. Money was always a problem. Thorpe never learned to manage finances. He drank heavily. He worked as a movie extra, a construction worker, a security guard. He gave speeches at schools for small fees. Once, in the 1930 seconds, during the Depression, he was found digging ditches for the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. When a reporter asked if he was embarrassed, Thorpe said, "I've got to eat. There's no shame in honest work." But there was shame in how America treated its greatest athlete. In 1943, during World War II, Thorpe joined the Merchant Marines at age 55, desperate for steady income. After the war, he continued working odd jobs, his health declining from years of physical punishment and alcohol abuse. In 1950, the Associated Press conducted a poll asking sports writers and broadcasters to name the greatest athlete of the first half of the 20th century. Jim Thorpe won overwhelmingly, receiving more votes than Babe Ruth, Jack Dempsey, and Jesse Owens combined. The recognition brought no financial relief. Thorpe was living in a trailer park in California, barely surviving on small payments from film studios. In 1951, Warner Brothers released Jim Thorpe All-American, a biographical film starring Burt Lancaster. Thorpe received $15,000 for the rights to his story, the most money he'd earned in decades. It was gone within a year. On the 28th of March, 1953, Jim Thorpe died of a heart attack in his trailer in Lomita, California. He was 65 years old. He had $2.50 in his pocket. His third wife, Patricia, approached the town of Shawnee, Oklahoma, where Thorpe was born, about hosting his funeral and creating a memorial. When the town council refused to provide funding, Patricia made a deal with two small Pennsylvania towns, Mauch-Chunk and East Mauch-Chunk. They agreed to merge, rename themselves Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania, build a memorial, and host his tomb in exchange for the publicity. Jim Thorpe, the greatest athlete in American history, is buried in a town he never visited, 110 miles from Carlisle, where he achieved his greatest triumphs. The Carlisle legacy. Innovation that outlived the innovators. Carlisle Indian Industrial School closed in 1918. The government decided it had failed in its mission to assimilate Native Americans, or perhaps succeeded too well at creating Indians who refused to accept second-class status. The school's football program had revolutionized American sports. The forward pass. While legalized in 1906, it was Carlisle that proved it could be the foundation of an offense, not just a desperation play. Every modern passing attack descends from Warner's innovations at Carlisle. The single-wing formation, used by virtually every team from the 1,920 seconds through 1,940 seconds, it emphasized deception and multiple threats. Today's spread offenses are its direct descendants. The screen pass, now a staple of every playbook, invented by Warner to counter aggressive defenses targeting Carlisle's smaller players. Zone blocking. Carlisle's offensive line, unable to physically dominate opponents, developed techniques of angling defenders and creating running lanes rather than driving them backward. Modern zone blocking schemes use the same principles. The spiral punt. Thorpe's technique became standard, adding 20 to 30 yards to average punt distances. The button hook route,
When Native Americans
now called the curl
their own
route,
game,
invented by
November
Carlisle
9th,
receivers to exploit the
1912,
fact that defenders would
3:47
overrun them
p.m.
downfield. The fake
Soldiers
in
Field,
reverse.
Cambridge,
Multiple players
Massachusetts.
faking with the ball to create confusion. Every modern play-action pass and reverse play traces to Carlisle's innovations. Pop Warner went on to coach at Stanford and Temple, winning more than 300 games and having the Pop Warner Youth Football Organization named in his honor. He never forgot Carlisle, saying later, "The Carlisle Indians were the smartest football players I ever coached. They had to be. They were playing against teams that wanted to prove Indian inferiority with every snap." Many of Carlisle's players went on to successful coaching careers, spreading their innovations. Gus Welch, Chippewa, coached at multiple colleges, emphasizing the passing game. Joe Guyon, Chippewa, played professionally and coached, teaching the single-wing formation. Albert Exendine coached for 30 years, installing Warner's system at small colleges. Pete Hauser became an NFL player and coach. Their contributions are rarely acknowledged in football history. Most Americans don't know that Native Americans invented much of what makes modern football possible. The Restoration. Justice delayed 70 years. The fight to restore Jim Thorpe's Olympic medals lasted decades. In 1982, the International Olympic Committee partially reversed its decision, returning replica medals to Thorpe's family and listing him as co-champion of the 1,912 pentathlon and decathlon, sharing honors with the original silver medalists who had since died. It was a compromise that satisfied no one. Thorpe's supporters wanted full restoration. The IOC wanted to save face. The result acknowledged his victory while refusing to fully admit the injustice. In 2022, 110 years after Stockholm, the IOC finally ruled to restore Thorpe as the sole champion of both events. His records were reinstated. His name stands alone. The announcement received minimal media coverage. Most Americans didn't notice. Jim Thorpe had been dead for 69 years. But at the Jim Thorpe Memorial in Pennsylvania, Thorpe's descendants gathered for a quiet ceremony. His great-grandson, Bill Thorpe, said, "My great-grandfather never cared about the medals. He knew what he'd accomplished. But this matters to us because it's an acknowledgement that what was done to him was wrong, that he deserved better from the country he made so proud." The question that haunts the story of Jim Thorpe and Carlisle Indian Industrial School forces an uncomfortable question. What do we do when our heroes emerge from our atrocities? Carlisle was designed to destroy Native American cultures. Its motto, "Kill the Indian, save the man," was genocidal in intent, if not always in execution. Thousands of Native children were forcibly separated from their families, forbidden from speaking their languages, punished for practicing their traditions. Many suffered abuse. Some died. The school's cemetery holds 186 graves of students who never returned home, victims of tuberculosis, pneumonia, and suicide. Yet from this horror came innovation that transformed American sports. The same institution that tried to erase Native identity inadvertently created a platform where Native Americans could demonstrate excellence that white society couldn't ignore. Was this a victory? A tragedy? Both? Suzanne Schoen-Harjo, a Cheyenne writer and activist who worked to restore Thorpe's medals, put it this way: Jim Thorpe and those Carlisle players took a weapon designed to destroy them this game, this school, this system, and they turned it around. They used football to say, "We're still here. We're still strong. You haven't defeated us." That's resistance. That's survival. But it doesn't make what happened to them okay. The Carlisle football team went 1-6-7-8-8-1-3 from 1,893 to 1,917. They defeated every major power at least once: Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Penn, Army, Navy. They produced multiple All-Americans and revolutionized how football is played. They did it while being told daily that their cultures were worthless, their traditions savage, their futures dependent on abandoning everything that made them who they were. The final score, November 9th, 1912, was not just a football game. It was a statement written in touchdowns and tackles, a declaration that the conquered were not defeated, that stolen children could still triumph. When Jim Thorpe crossed Harvard's goal line for the first time that afternoon, he wasn't just scoring 6 points. He was scoring for every child ripped from their family and sent to boarding schools, for every language beaten out of a child's mouth, for every tradition deemed savage and forbidden. The scoreboard read 54-7, but the real score was written in the faces of Harvard's players, the silence of the crowd, the grudging respect even racist newspapers couldn't entirely suppress. For one afternoon in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the children of conquered nations beat the sons of conquerors at their own game, using tactics their own game couldn't answer. The innovations Carlisle developed, the forward pass, the single wing, the screen pass, the spiral punt, are Jim Thorpe's real Olympic medals. Every Sunday in the NFL, every Saturday in college football, every Friday night under small-town lights, teams run plays invented by Native Americans trying to survive at a school designed to erase them. The numbers that tell the story, the statistics from that November afternoon in 1912, remain staggering, even by modern standards. Jim Thorpe's final line: 25 carries for 191 yards, 6 yards per carry, 4 rushing touchdowns, 6 of 8 passing for 127 yards, 2 passing touchdowns, 1 punt return, touchdown, 85 yards, 6 extra points made, 7 punts, for 336 total yards, 48-yard average, 11 tackles on defense, 60 minutes played. In modern football terms, Thorpe accounted for 318 yards of offense, scored 32 points, and averaged 48 yards per punt, all while playing every snap on both sides of the ball. Team statistics: Carlisle, 433 total yards of offense. Harvard, 134 total yards of offense. Carlisle, 26 first downs. Harvard, 7 first downs. Carlisle time of possession, 42 minutes. Harvard time of possession, 18 minutes. But beyond the numbers was the visual dominance. Eyewitnesses reported that Harvard's players looked defeated by the third quarter, going through the motions, waiting for the humiliation to end. The Boston Globe's reporter wrote, "It was not merely that Carlisle won, but the manner of victory." Harvard appeared not as equals who fought valiantly and lost, but as men who discovered they were competing in a contest where the rules had changed and they no longer understood the game. The wider context, what Harvard represented. To understand the significance of Carlisle's victory, you must understand what Harvard represented in 1912. Harvard wasn't just a university. It was the institutional embodiment of American aristocracy. Its student body was drawn almost exclusively from New England's oldest families, the descendants of Mayflower Pilgrims, Revolutionary War heroes, and industrial tycoons. Harvard's football team was coached by Percy Haughton, one of the era's most successful coaches. His 1,912 squad featured multiple All-Americans and was considered one of the strongest teams in the nation. They'd defeated Yale, Princeton, and Penn in previous seasons. More importantly, Harvard's administration viewed football as character education for America's future leaders. Harvard President A. Lawrence Lowell argued that football teaches young men the virtues required for leadership: strategic thinking, discipline under pressure, and the ability to command others toward a common goal. The subtext was clear. Football prepared Harvard men to run America, to be senators, judges, generals, and captains of industry. It was training for empire. When Carlisle arrived at Harvard Stadium, they weren't just facing a football team. They were facing an ideology that said certain people were born to lead and others born to follow. That white Anglo-Saxon Protestants represented civilization's pinnacle, while Native Americans represented its primitive origins. The game was meant to reinforce these hierarchies. Harvard would win because Harvard men were superior. The natural order would be confirmed. Instead, the natural order was destroyed. The individuals behind the jerseys, the Carlisle team that defeated Harvard, was composed of extraordinary individuals, each with their own story of loss and resilience. Gus Welch, the quarterback and one of Thorpe's closest friends. Welch had been forcibly removed from his family in Minnesota at age 8 and sent to Carlisle. He learned English by being locked in a closet for speaking Ojibwe. He became valedictorian of his class and later coached football at several colleges, always emphasizing the passing game Warner had taught him. He died in 1970 at age 81, having spent his life promoting Native American education. Joe Guyon, Chippewa, a bruising running back who played alongside Thorpe. Guyon went on to play professional football for 10 years and was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1966, one of only 2 Carlisle players, along with Thorpe, to receive that honor. He spent his later years working as an advocate for Native American rights. Alex Arcasa, the end, who caught 2 touchdown passes against Harvard. Arcasa returned to Washington State after Carlisle and worked as a rancher. He died in 1960, largely forgotten, except by his family and tribe. Pete Hauser, a lineman who blocked for Thorpe. Hauser played professional football and later became a coach and educator. He was one of the first Native Americans to earn a master's degree in education, which he used to advocate for better schools on reservations. Possum Powell, a defensive back who intercepted 2 passes against Harvard. Powell died in World War I, serving with the American Expeditionary Force in France. He was 26 years old. Elmer Bush, the center who snapped the ball to Thorpe on every play. Bush worked as a longshoreman in San Francisco after graduation and died in 1939 from complications of tuberculosis, the same disease that killed so many boarding school students. William Garlow, Tuscarora, a tackle who anchored Carlisle's undersized line. Garlow returned to his reservation in New York and became a chief of his nation, working to preserve Tuscarora language and traditions. He lived to be 92, dying in 1984. Each of these men carried trauma that modern readers can barely imagine. They'd been taken from families, stripped of cultural identity, told their languages were worthless and their traditions savage. Some had witnessed siblings die at boarding schools. All had experienced racism so casual and pervasive that it was simply the atmosphere they breathed. Yet they came together to create something beautiful. A football team that played with precision, intelligence, and innovation that changed the sport forever.